Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm very excited to be moderating this panel. My name is Abeer Hoque, and as a Nigerian-born writer, I've always been really keeping tabs on all the writers that come out of the part of the world that I grew up in. And so it was really exciting for me to be introducing these three amazing writers. We've already got a little bit of an introduction for them, but Abubakar's debut novel, The Season of Crimson Blossoms, is a vividly described, taboo-breaking story set in central Nigeria with a cast of female-dominated characters. Chika Unigwe is the author of 4 novels, including On Black Sisters Street, which is a clear-spoken, heartbreaking book about 4 African sex workers in Antwerp. And Nadifa Mohamed, her second novel, The Orchard of Lost Souls, is a fierce, beautiful, and harrowing story of Somalia's civil war as seen through the eyes of 3 very different girls. So let me start first with the title of our panel, which is the Afropolitans, which may or may not be familiar to everyone here. It's constructed from the word Africa, Afro, and the Greek word for citizen, and was an attempt to emphasize the ordinary citizen's experience in Africa. The term was popularized in an essay by Etisalat, which described Afropolitans as having these hip, urban lives with international careers. And there have been some critiques of this essay, but I like the original definition, the one of the experiences of the ordinary citizens. And when looking at literature through this frame, I think it's quite relevant for each of the 3 authors here. So let me begin by asking each of you what, if anything, this term means to you and your writing, and how you would describe your work in that larger context. Nadifa, do you want to start?
It's a difficult question. I think I haven't read Taye's original essay, so I've only kind of picked up parts of her thesis on it. For me, I think it applies maybe more to people who left Africa at an older age, maybe as teenagers to study abroad, who have family wealth to rely on to pursue artistic careers. So it's true, it's definitely true for some people, but it was not true for me, and it's not true for many of the African writers that I meet.
You know, we've been debating this Afropolitanism for a very long time, and my view about it is that it's a reaction to this poverty porn narrative, where because you have one argument, you have to have a counter argument. And poverty porn is basically this idea of reinforcing the projection of Africa in the media through literature, where you have to write about refugee camps, where you have to write about war and famine and killing and flies, you know, all those horrible things that the media project about Africa. And to kind of counter that narrative, you know, this Afropolitan came up, and which is supposed to project an Africa of young, vibrant people who travel across the world and do amazing things and wear fabulous shoes like Chika's. And you know, I feel it's an extreme reaction. And I don't feel it's necessarily representative of the Africa I'm familiar with, or the writers I meet, or the people I meet on my travels. So I'm not sure I'm very comfortable being described as an Afropolitan.
I agree with everything that Nadifa and Abubakar have said. But I can understand why the whole idea of Afropolitanism is attractive to Etisalat, you know, because Taye isn't actually rooted in any African country. So Taye was born in the UK, lived in Ghana to a Nigerian mother and a Ghanaian father or something, and then moved to the US. And so Taye has moved a lot and isn't rooted anywhere. And for her, the idea of this global African citizenship, you know, is very attractive and seductive in a way that it's not to me. And one major problem with Afropolitanism as well is that in sort of trying to counter the single story of, the Africa of poverty and illness, it's also creating another single story, that is not the entire truth of African realities. I mean, Chimamanda says in The Danger of a Single Story that the problem with stereotypes is not that they're not true, but that they're only partly true. They don't show the entire story. And so Afropolitanism is a counter-narrative that is doing the exact same thing. It's accusing the other single story of doing. So it's a single story that I'm not comfortable with either. I mean, it would be nice as a cocktail. It sounds like a fabulous cocktail, Afropolitan.
Yeah, and it does have these sort of overtones of elitism, which are problematic. But so, in order to give you just a little bit of a taste of each of these writers who have very interesting and grounded narratives, I thought maybe we could each have just a little short reading from each of these authors. So, would...
Start Nadifa? Yeah. I'll do it here. Don't need to stand up here. Yeah, and you can read. However you want. Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll be reading from my first novel, The Orchard of The Black Mamba Boy, which is about my father and his incredible early life in 10 different countries. He was a sailor, but before he became a sailor, he was a child soldier, a musician, a street boy. He did 100 million things. So the very first chapter is set in Aden, in Yemen, and it's in October 1935. The muezzin's call startled Jama out of his dream. He pulled himself up to look at the sun rising over the cake-domed mosques and the gingerbread Adani apartments, glowing at their tips with white frosting. The black silhouettes of birds looped high in the inky sky, dancing around the few remaining stars and the full, pregnant moon. The black planets of Jama's eyes roamed over Aden, the busy industrial steamer point, crater, the sandstone old town, its curvaceous dun-colored buildings merging into the Shum volcanoes. The Ma'ala and Sheikh Usman districts, white and modern, between the hills and sea. Wood smoke and infants' cries drifted up as women took a break from preparing breakfast to perform their dawn prayers, not needing the exhortations of the old muezzin. A vulture's nest encircled the ancient minaret, the broken branches festooned with rubbish, the nest corrupting the neighborhood with the stench of carrion. The attentive mother fed rotting morsels to her fragile chicks, her muscular wings unhunched and at rest beside her. Jama's own mother, Ambaro, stood by the roof edge, softly singing in her deep and melodious voice. She sang before and after work. Not because she was happy, but because the songs escaped from her mouth, her young soul roaming outside her body to take the air before it was pulled back into drudgery. Ambaro shook the ghosts out from her hair and began her morning soliloquy. Some people don't know how much work goes into feeding their ungrateful guts. Think they are some kind of sultan who can idle about without a care in the world, head full of trash, only good for running around with trash. Well, over my dead body, I don't grind my backbone to dust to sit and watch filthy bottom boys roll around on their backs. These poems of contempt, these gabes of dissatisfaction, greeted Jama every morning. Incredible meandering streams of abuse flowed from his mother's mouth, sweeping away the mukadim at the factory, her son, long-lost relatives, enemies, men, women, Somalis, Arabs, Indians, into a pit of damnation. Get up, stupid boy. You think this is your father's house? Get up, you fool. I need to go to work. Jama tried to flee his mother. Jama tried to flee, but his mother dived and attacked him with stinging blows. Get up. I have to walk 2 miles to work and you make a fuss over getting up, is that it? She raged. Go on, get lost, you good for nothing. Jama blamed Aden for making his mother so angry. He wanted to return to Hargeisa, where his father could calm her down with love songs. It was always at daybreak that Jarmat craved his father. All his memories were sharper in the clean morning light. His father's laughter and songs around the campfire, the soft, long-fingered hands enveloping his own. Jarmat couldn't be sure if these were real memories or just dreams seeping into his waking life. But he cherished these fragile images, hoping they would not disappear with time. He remembered traversing the desert on strong shoulders, peering down on the world like a prince. But already his father's face is lost to him, hidden behind stubborn clouds. Thank you.
So my novel is called Season of Crimson Blossoms, and it's the story of a relationship between a grandmother and a political thug who is 30 years younger. And all this happens in a conservative Muslim community in northern Nigeria. So I'm just going to read a part where Binta, the major character, is confronted by the women in her community. She was still thinking of the Sharia's ruling on falsely accusing decent women of depravity when she reached the madrasa and found two groups of women. One was huddled around Maria while she tried to interest them in wares from the huge bag beneath her desk: makeup kits, perfume from Arabia, henna from India, bottled honey, and the usual variety of sex boosters and creams. Another group had formed at the back, clustered around Malama Ummah, going over previous lessons under the guidance of the matron. Ustaz Noura was not in class, neither was his wife, Murja. Binta was enthralled by some of the wares on Maria's desk and reached for a jar of pure honey. When she asked if it was definitely pure, Maria scolded at her. "Well, it isn't adulterated, if that's what you mean." The other women turned to her. Binta felt cowed by the attention. "Well, you know, sometimes people do add sugar." "Binta, keep my tin if you're not buying. Who are you to come here with accusations? Imagine the hyena calling the dog a savage," Maria hissed. That wasn't how Binta had imagined the scenario would play out. And before she could marshal her thoughts, Ladidi, the skinny woman famed for her half-dozen divorces and her children, fathered by as many men, waved her hand before her nose and cleared her throat. "What is that god-awful smell?" The women sniffed the air, and having failed to perceive it, they turned to Ladidi. After an appropriate interval, in which Ladidi savored their attention, she made a declaration that stunned the entire class, including Malama Ummah's earnest group devoted to the study of the hadith at the rear. "It is the smell of zina, wallahi. I could perceive it from anywhere. There is a fornicator in this class." And she spat and turned her back to the slimy markers that slid solidly down the wall. "Who are you calling a fornicator, Ladidi? Are you making false accusation against me? Can you prove anything?" Ladidi chuckled. "Who mentioned your name?" she hissed. "But did they not say that a guilty person would sweat even in the rain? I came Banza." Binta put down the bottle of honey on the table and in the heavy silence that followed, walked to her seat in the middle of the class. She sat down and bowed her head. But then Shafa'atu, the young bride who was stationed just behind Binta and was queasy already with the burgeoning seed inside her, got up abruptly and knocked over her bag in the process. She gathered her books from the floor and, holding her hand over her mouth, hurried out of the class. Ladidi adjusted her hijab, spat on the floor, cast a sidelong glance at Binta, whose head was still bowed, and walked out of the class. Two other women followed her. And then Malama Ummah resumed her tutorials with a voice made unnecessarily loud as to taking the entire class, and with a fervor that was driven by restrained fury. Binta could hear her, but she was not listening. The words cascaded off her consciousness and registered only in the background of her thoughts. Her mind was numbed by the recollection of the silence that had accompanied her to her seat. Her vision was blurred by the film of tears that lingered in her eyes because she would not let them run down her cheeks. She had no idea how long she sat like that, head bowed, tears imprisoned in her eyes, and a whistling silence in her mind. When she stood up, she became conscious of the abrupt silence around her. She picked up her bag and walked out with as much dignity as she could muster, her pace measured, her shoulders held straight, defiant even. But inside, she could feel the weight of her heart, and it felt so much heavier than she ever remembered. Thank you.
So I'm going to read from On Black Sister Street, which is a novel about 4 Nigerian sex workers in Antwerp, Belgium. And just to contextualize it, it's not a spoiler because from the very first chapter, you know that the protagonist I'm talking about is going to die anyway, so this is not a spoiler. Sisi placed her tote on her lap, daffodils against the grass green of her dress. One more stop and it would be hers. She got off the bus and walked the 300 meters to Luke's house. She felt immortal, unstoppable. Her world was as it should be. She liked Edegem. There was an authenticity to people there that made central Antwerp seem somewhat spurious. Here, people smiled and said hello to her. Strangers she was not likely to see again asked how she was and looked like they meant it. They listened while she said she was fine, thank you, and you? People would start conversations with her at bus stops. They would talk about the rising cost of bread. Old women would tell of when they lived in the Congo many decades ago, talk fondly of Albertville, which had been renamed something they can never remember, something African, ask you if you speak Lingala, what you think of Kabila, talk of their niece who couldn't have a baby and adopted a beautiful little son from Rwanda or Burundi. Beautiful baby, they would say, only problem is his hair, quite difficult to comb. In central Antwerp, people did not care whether you lived or died. When they said hello in shops, you could tell that it was routine, something rationed and passed out grudgingly. They said hello and looked past you, wanting to get on with their day, their lives that had no place for you. There was no emotion in the voices. There was a furious pace to the city that hindered people from stopping to smile. And at bus stops, there was a general suspicion of all things conspicuously foreign. Very often, Sisi would find old women clutching their bikes tight if she stood close to them, strangling their bags under their armpits. And men quickly patted their trouser back pockets, assuring themselves that their wallets were safe. Even her fellow Africans did not talk to her. They had no curiosity to satisfy. Central Antwerp was a city of strangers, of anonymity. It was this anonymity that she craved sometimes. On the last day of Sisi's life, nothing could have prepared her for her transition. The May sky was a spread of azure anchored by a band of pinkish red, the color of a fresh breeze on white skin. It was a perfect, perfect day. The weather was just the way she liked it, not hot enough to be uncomfortable and not cold enough for a jacket. Such weather made her think of heaven. Once, when she was young and was discovering words and worlds beyond her own, she'd asked her mother what heaven was like. Not hot like here, her mother had answered, and not cold like I hear it is overseas. Heaven has perfect weather. Sisi walked in the perfect weather, walking Antwerp's many narrow streets. Every time she took the bus outside Antwerp, she was aware how easy it was to tell that one had left the city or had re-entered. The landmarks could not be missed. Houses with peeling paint and broken windows, derelict buildings looking like life had been hard on them. They always reminded Sisi of drug users who'd aged before their time, scars of hard living crisscrossing their faces like mosquito netting. Sometimes, Sisi thought, stepping over a mound of brown stool, Antwerp seemed like a huge incinerator. She walked along the Pelikanstraat and toward the central station. As always, here were drunks with eyes like quarter moons and throats full of stories. A middle-aged man with a long beard accosted her. He reeked of liquor, and beside him, a shaggy-haired dog, fat like some medieval suzerain's eunuch, stood with its tongue out dripping saliva. The man held out a callous arm. Art supplie, tapir eat from me? No Dutch, Francais, Deutsch, Espanol, English? You've got €1 for me? Just €1, boss fare, please. I just lost my wallet. Sissy fished in her pocket and gave him a coin. She was in a good mood and had some money to spare. Thank you.
Thank you all. I have a couple of general questions and some specific questions to your work. I'll start with, some of the books that I mentioned anyway, of the three of you, have female protagonists. Chika's novel, this one that she just read from, follows these 4 African sex workers. Abubakar's book has a older Muslim widow who has an affair with a young thief, and Nadifa's second novel shows the breakdown of the Somalian civil society and the onset of civil war as seen through the eyes of these 3 women. Could you each talk about why you chose those points of view and what it enabled you to do and why it was important?
Okay, I'll start again. I think, first of all, it was a reaction to my first novel, which is about men, about boys, about becoming masculine, full of soldiers and sailors and street boys. So there's not much space for women. There's one strong female character in there who guides some of the action, but it didn't allow me to very much investigate the lives of Somali women of that time. And I wanted to do that. And I wanted to do that in the context of a story which so far has been very masculine, and that's the story of the Somali collapse of the state and the war. So the very few things out there are published are either foreign journalists writing about what they saw in Somalia in the early 90s, or accounts of people who escaped from Somalia, and it's kind of, it's only portrayed really as a hell. So I was born in Somalia in 1981, and it was already a dictatorship before I was born, but it turned into something much meaner and more frightening and more lethal by the time I was born, after the war with Ethiopia. So men were fleeing the country either to join a rebel movement based in Ethiopia, or they were working abroad and sending remittances home. And even the people that were left behind, the men that were left behind, had their lives very much constrained by the government. So women had to step out and make money for the family and to lead in a way that they hadn't before. So I thought it'd be very interesting, especially in a regime that was outwardly feminist and believed in equality between the sexes and was very repressive towards religious clerics who argued with them. I wanted to find out what it meant to be a woman at that time in these different contexts.
Thank you.
To be honest, I wouldn't say I chose to tell the story from this perspective. I think the characters chose me to tell their story. If I say it any other way, I think I'm going to be dishonest, but that is the truth. You know, the story came to me the way it started, and it was flowed from there. And I felt because it's talking about a lot of issues that affect women, and this is a demography that hasn't been given voice, you know, due to social and cultural restrictions. And I felt the issues were really important. They should be talked about. And if I talked about it from a male perspective, it would be sort of a male narrating a woman's story from his own point of view. But I let the character inhabit me, and I felt like I projected her voice and projected the issues and the sentiments she went through. And, you know, in that way, I felt I kind of did a better job of projecting her story and connecting with the issues that were really important. And I mean, it's great to see that women in the north of Nigeria especially felt like this character was representative of their reality in certain instances. And for me, that is very rewarding to know.
Let me just ask before Chika Just a follow-up question to that. So your protagonist has this affair, which is this joyously erotic affair, actually, with this younger man, which is unusual, right, for especially in the context of a conservative northern Nigerian Muslim society. And the society judges and condemns her at every turn, but she ends up, she's given space to enjoy this, despite the fact that there's this sense of doom and condemnation. And there's other sensitively fleshed out female characters. But there are also numerous instances of women who are also described as hysterical or malevolent or bad-tempered, which are also, associated with these negative female stereotypes. And how do you see those portrayals functioning in the book? Is that like a misogynistic society of that community, or?
Oh. Well, I mean, the issue is that I think when you look at a group of people, no matter how you want to be politically correct in their projection, there has to be a stereotype, right? And I've spoken about the stereotyping in teaching classes, where sometimes stereotype is a basis for a narrative. So if you have a stereotype for a policeman, for instance, and this person happens to be a minor character, if he deviates from that stereotype, people would be interested in this character, and they would think, well, what's going on with this character? I think he's going to be interesting. So there are some characters that have to kind of conform to the stereotype so that the focus is on the major characters in your story. And sometimes I do find it bizarre when people expect that because you're writing about women or you're writing about men, they have to be perfect. They're perfect. I mean, even the ones we think are perfect, the ones we really like, have their flaws. And it's only fair to project their goodness and their flaws. We were talking about romanticism earlier. And that is the case with people, I think everybody is fundamentally good and fundamentally flawed, and it is just natural to project distance.
Thank you. Chika, do you want to?
So your first question, female protagonist. Yeah. My novel takes place in a world that is primarily primarily female. So the sex migration from Nigeria, which is where all the 4 women in my novel migrate from, is very much female. It's very gendered. We don't have men migrating from Nigeria to work the red light district of Antwerp. It's women, and so it made sense to have female protagonists. And I didn't want to tell this story I didn't want to give their clients a voice. That wasn't the story I wanted to tell. My curiosity and my fascination and my intrigue was basically centered on the women who, travel so far away from Nigeria to come and service the red light district of Antwerp. I wasn't at all concerned with their clients. It's not the story of clients. It's the story of these 4 women and how they sort of navigate their way in this new world that they find themselves in and are determined to make their own. And to what extent do they succeed, and to what extent do they fail, and to what extent do their expectations sort of fit the dreams or the realities that they meet with in Belgium.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting in the 4 characters you have, they're not, and you spoke about this in an earlier panel, about how the idea of victimhood is not actually it's sort of this evenly like.
Yeah, I think I said this yesterday at a panel. So when I was writing on Black Sister Street, because the world of the red light district of Antwerp was it was totally new to me. The only way I could justify writing about it and still maintain a certain sense of integrity was to actually go there and do some work. I had to go there and talk to the women. One of the first women I spoke to didn't think I was a writer, didn't believe I was a writer. As far as she was concerned, if you're Nigerian and you're here, then you're a sex worker. And from all the stories I heard, the stories I heard were counter narratives to the constant stories of victimhood. These are women with, and I say this with a sense of, with some caution, these are women with agency. But then again, how much of an agency do you have if you don't really have other options? You know, for example, someone told me about an auction house in Brussels, and this sort of makes its way into the novel, an auction house in Brussels where Nigerian women are auctioned off. And so the women come in knowing that they're going to be auctioned off, and they're hoping to be auctioned off. And so what they do is they bribe, for example, if a musical group is coming, if a band is coming into Belgium to perform, they bribe the managers to get them on the list so that they get tourist visas to come in. And then they get in and then they're taken to this place where, you know, everybody in the business know. And it's very polarized. So all the buyers, or most of the buyers, are men, you know, and the auctioneer is a man. And all the sex workers are women. And yeah, this is sort of difficult, but they are paraded naked, and all they have around their necks are like number boards, number tags. And he said, you know, and they twirl and they walk around, and the auctioneer is like, you know, reeling off all their qualities. You know, like number 5 has the kind of boobs that white men like, because of course all the clients are white men. You know, so number 5 has the sort of boobs that white men like. Number 6 has the sort of buttocks that white men like. And number 5 and number 6 are twirling and smiling. And I can't imagine that that is easy for anybody to do, no matter what you're going to get at the end of it, right? And I asked, I said, so what happens, you know, what happens if you're not bought? I said, well, you've already spent a lot of money coming into the country. You're not going to want to go back because you left because you didn't want to be there in the first place, you know. And so you're hoping, you're stuck, and you're actually hoping to be bought because you don't want to be left in this country without a pimp. You don't want to be left without anyone to look after you. And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's really troubling. Let me ask Nadifa, in your second novel, I was particularly taken with how precisely and sensitively the trials and tribulations of older women were portrayed in both bodily and societal ways. And I think you can measure a society's progress in a way by how it treats its women and its marginalized communities, disability, infirmity, age, gender. These are all themes that you touch on. Could you talk about this in the context of the larger story that you're trying to tell?
Yes. So earlier I spoke about the more conscious reasons why I decided to write The Orchard of Lost Souls, but there's always the illogical or the emotional reasons why you write something. And I think the very first character that came to me was Kausar, who is older, in her probably 50s, but feels much older, and really has given up on life. She intended to be a mother and a wife, and that's all she really wanted from life, was to have comfort and ease and family and love. But it hasn't worked out for her for various reasons. So she's now marooned in her bungalow with her best friend, Dahabo, coming to visit regularly. And I think Kausar, the older woman, was, her situation was based on something that happened to my own grandmother, who, after we left, was paralyzed. And when the war broke out, everyone fled for their lives, because it had gone from being a dangerous but tolerable situation to being intolerable, and the whole city emptied out within a matter of days. And the people that were left behind were the infirm, the elderly, the lonely, the mentally ill. All of those people were there. And I was interested in who was left behind for various reasons. So Kausar is left behind, a street girl is left behind, a soldier is left behind. And I think there was some of me in Kausar, there was some of my mother. Like, she became a very familiar but very distinct character very quickly. So most of the time I spent writing the book, it was spent on Kausar. I just couldn't stop writing her. And I think it was that sense of loss, because Kausar understood that this didn't have to be the way it ended up. I think Somalia is always seen as just the archetypal failed state, as if that was always where it was destined to be. but it wasn't. And she was there during the British colony, that was their British Somaliland. She was there when the new flag was raised and it became independent. She was there through the very exciting, heady 60s and 70s. So her grief is not just for herself, but it's also for all of the hopes that she had.
Thank you. So I'm interested, this is a general question, in how language plays a role in all of your writing. And I'm not talking about that often tiresome question about why one writes in English, but how you each use local languages and phrases in the text, as well as translated proverbs. There's no glossary. It's not always obvious from context what something means. And sometimes it is. And I kind of love this, right? I feel like as readers, we should get used to reading other languages mixed in with English, even if we don't understand it, and that should be okay. For example, in Chika's novel, there's this line, I liked the look of the woman, ugly, ojoka, but in a very attractive way. Or in Nadifa's second novel, her pale pink didik, maybe I'm not saying it right, is it didik? Lights up in the sunlight, engulfing her body like a flower bud. Or any one of the fascinating proverbs that start each of the chapters in Abubakar's book, like this one, a snail will never claim to have horns where rams are gathered. So would each of you talk about what language means to you in this context? Maybe Abubakar, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to start, but I just want you to know that I've taken notes, that you didn't ask me why my male characters have the range that they do, but you asked me about the females. Oh. So, just to put that
Noted.
aside. For me, language is, we had this debate about language the other day, and how you consciously choose the language you want to, write in. And for me, English has always been the language I prefer to write in. But I'm also conscious that I write about people who speak a different language other than English, and it was really important for me that the nuances of this language are represented in the way it is captured in English. So sometimes you have phrases that I include that I feel if you translate them into English, they become watery. And I just felt, well, there's no need translating this, and there's no need explaining it, because I am conscious also that my readers may not understand this language, but they should be able to understand the context. I'm trusting them to be that intelligent. Sometimes I feel like African writers are expected to explain everything. So if you say Gary, for instance, you have to explain what Gary is, where it comes from. But then when someone writes sauerkraut in a novel, nobody translates it for you. And I've read sauerkraut in novel, and I don't know what it looks like. It doesn't detract from my understanding of the most essential parts of the novel. So in that context, that is how I approach my my writing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love, one of the most pleasurable parts of writing a novel for me is taking care of the language, playing with the language, following the language wherever it might lead you. And I'm inspired by lots of things, by music lyrics, by poetry, by the way that people talk on the bus. All kinds of things feed into how I write. But in terms of the languages, it didn't occur to me to give a glossary. I think my first novel, I just did it for myself. I didn't think about publishing it, and all of these kind of, I didn't think about a reader. And I'd grown up reading Salman Rushdie, Rohinton Mistry, Arundhati Roy, all of these Indian writers that I believed I understood exactly what they said when they were using different languages. But now that I've published 2 books, I think that I've overestimated people's ability to understand what I mean when I'm not using English. I thought that it's very obvious from the context, but it's not, and they can actually take a completely different idea from what I meant. I've just finished my 3rd novel, and it's full of various languages. It's got Hindi, German, Somali, Arabic, British slang of different descriptions. So when I think about the reader now, I'm a bit concerned.
Don't be. Let them fend for themselves.
It might be time for a glossary.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest pieces of advice that my editor gave me when I was writing on Black Sister Street, and sort of had this anxiety that many post-colonial writers have about people understanding them. And by people, we mean the other, Westerners. My editor said, just assume knowledge. And what people don't know, they should go and find out. And that sort of freed me completely. And I think it was Rumi that said that language is home, right? Just paraphrasing it. And for me, that is true. Which is why when I write, even though I'm writing in English, I sort of take Achebe's, what Achebe said to heart. Achebe said once, don't be confused by the fact that we're writing in English, because what we are doing is doing unheard of things with the language. What you're actually reading when you read me is you're reading Igbo written in English. And I like that idea of colonization, So if, someone from some little island could come to my country and colonize it and then force us all to learn English. Up until today in Nigeria, if you go to a good school, and you use any other language but English, right, you're punished. And so you grow up sort of seeing your own language as irrelevant. Yeah, so Igbo was a language that we could speak at home, but I could never use it in school.
It's about power. It's about how much.
It's about power, definitely. And so this is me reversing that power. So I'm going to write in English, but I'm writing Igbo in English, right? So this is in UK English, and for me that's also very important. That's sort of taking back, reclaiming some of that power, because I'm not going to be able to colonize some islands. I'm going to colonize the language when I write, and so it's a very conscious decision that I take. And I think that also sometimes when you read what I write, you hear the cadences of, if you're a very observant reader or careful reader, you hear the cadences of the language. You hear the cadences of Igbo when you read my work, and that's very important for me. And yeah, and the same as you, I didn't want to, once my editor told me just assume knowledge, which was very freeing, I realized that I didn't need a glossary, and I didn't need to explain anything to anybody. Nobody ever explains the West to us, You go to college and you read Dostoevsky and you read Shakespeare, and nobody explains it to you. But then up until recently, you read an African book in college in the US, and they start by situating the country for you and giving you background knowledge, which is bullshit,
And sorry, so can I just say one thing? And it also situates the author as an anthropologist almost. As not an artist, but someone who's explaining a culture or a place to you.
Precisely, thank you. Thanks for
that. That's exactly my sentiment. You're sort of an anthropologist, maybe a narrative one, but you're an anthropologist. But like Chika said, I'm very conscious of the language my characters speak, and I feel like I'm basically just narrating and translating at the same time. So when they speak, in my head, they speak Hausa, right? So when they speak English, that becomes a foreign language. So in the instances where the characters deviate from the norm and speak English, it is italicized. So we italicize, okay, they're speaking English here, that's a foreign language, which is what normally happens to, characters who are speaking in English and suddenly speak a different language, and that is italicized. So that was something I was very conscious of. We did talk about this with my editor as well. And I said, I'm very conscious this is what I want to do, this is how I see the story, and we didn't have any problem at all agreeing on that.
Yeah, thank you. And Chika, also you have you've also written in Flemish, which is an entirely different language from the ones that you grew up with. And so did you find that was did you think about story differently or characters differently?
I came to Dutch, so Dutch and Flemish are the same thing. So I came to Dutch as an adult. And when I write, one of the things I find very pleasurable about writing is being able to play with language. And I can't do that with Dutch because I'm very conscious of the fact that it's not a language that I have in Dutch. They say under the knee, so I don't have it under my knee. It's not something that, under the knee. And so when I write in Dutch, I write differently. I'm also sort of a different person when I'm thinking in Dutch. And I started writing in Dutch out of necessity because I was living in Belgium. I was writing in English and nobody was taking any notice. And the only way that I could sort of break into that market was to start writing in their own language. And so I did that. But it's not a language
she just did that, she just wrote a Dutch story.
But it's not a language that it's not my first choice of language to write in. I think one colonial language is already enough.
So I think we'll open up for questions. If there's a mic around. Okay, so there's a question up here.
So I have a question for any of you. Closer. Is it? You can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Yes. Okay. Any of you, as from a writer's point of view, how do you deal with stereotypes? Because when we write a protagonist, the character naturally becomes round, because we can see that person from in different settings. We can understand its history, its presence, and its future, maybe. But the other characters who would be antagonists or living around this protagonist naturally becomes flatter. And so how do you relate to stereotypes, and when these characters become, when we get less of an understanding from them?
So I think the question is about stereotypes and how you deal with them in your writing, and ones that are more fleshed out, ones that are flatter. Does anyone want to take it?
I think, like Abubakar said earlier, human beings are round. I mean, you hardly find anybody who is, completely good except me, or completely bad except Abubakar. But, I think that one of the things that writing does to you is that it helps you build a sense of empathy. And I think when you do that, then it's very easy to sort of dismantle stereotypes when you're writing. Does that make sense?
It's maybe one of your jobs.
I just feel like stereotypical characters are characters that have not been fully developed. Because in a way, everybody's stereotypical. White people are like this, black people are like this, Indians are like that. But then when you look at these people closely, you see the layers that these people have. For instance, my character, Rhys, has a way of speaking. He says you understand a lot. And that is kind of stereotypical of the way people like him speak. But then when you engage with the character, you discover there are layers beneath that you understand, and that's speech mannerism. So characters are like that, in my opinion.
Someone else?
Hi, my question is for Chika. You said earlier that you conducted research in Antwerp in a red light district for your book, right? In a red light district for your book, you conducted research there, right? You met up with people. Yes. So my question is, when you write your book, how much of those lives do you fictionalize? And does it ever bother you while fictionalizing such an intense life story as to whether you're doing justice to it with the character that you're building or not? How much of their lives do you actually fictionalize in the book? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. So the research was one thing, and the writing, the fiction, was another thing. I didn't set out to write a documentary. I could never do that. And I didn't set out to write nonfiction. And so even though some of the stories in my novel come from things that I heard, and some of, for example, like the auction house, none of the stories are the stories of one particular person. So they're like a composite of different stories and then some imagination. So there are things that could have happened or that could happen, but they didn't happen to any particular person. So the research, I sort of believe I believe in the author having integrity. For me, that's very important. It's very important for me that I respect my characters. And so the research was basically to be able to respect the characters by writing the truth of their, not like the real truth of their lives, but the emotional truth of their lives. And I was telling someone yesterday that before going to the red light district, before researching the novel, I had never been to the red light district. But standing there as a black woman who could easily be a sex worker suddenly gave me just a little bit of idea of what it must have been like for my characters the first day they landed there, the first day they had to work. You know, I mean, it's not, I can never live their lives. I can never fully imagine what their lives are like. But doing that research and being there and sort of feeling very uncomfortable the first day I was there, and men looking at me like, you know, wondering whether to buy me or not, you know, sort of gave me just a little bit of an idea of what it must be like for the characters and to help to write the characters better. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a curiosity after listening to you guys talk about the anthropologist. How do you dethrone or disemploy the anthropologist? How do you get them out of the network's way? Is that possible?
Do you mean the anthropologist in you or the external real anthropologist?
I guess the one that it felt like that y'all were conversing about pushing against and having to operate against. I'm curious about what the dismantling of that could look like. Feel free to be metaphorical, but also just how it could be a process to sort of remove that sort of middle man or middle person that oftentimes like interrupts the distribution of accuracy of story.
Well, I think the chief way, first of all, is that we're writing our own words. We're writing our own books. And I know in the Somali context, that's actually quite rare. So books by Somali women are often ghostwritten by non-Somali women. And the stories therefore become very repetitive. They become quite untrue. They develop a shape that is for a foreign eye. So the very first thing is you write yourself. That's what you should do. Secondly, I learn a lot about Somali life, Somali history, Somali culture through my books. So there is a lot of learning involved. And it's not that you're trying to explain anything, but you're trying to contextualize, you're trying to investigate, you're looking for the contradictions, the nuances. And I think that most writers do that. But the bigger issue, perhaps, is how it's perceived. So you can't control the way that your work is perceived by other people.
Sort of add to that, I think that there's been maybe a small evolution, especially in the past 15 years when African writers began to be published by commercial publishers in the West, you know, and so sort of opened up African writers to, or their works to a different sort of readership. Because before then, we had Heinemann African series. And Heinemann African series published primarily books by Africans, and the covers were, you know, very anthropological and really boring covers. And you would never find those books in bookstores. You'd find them in libraries. And so just both the cover and the publishing itself encouraged you to read those works as anthropological works. But now that, you know, African writers are, you know, Mbule Mbue got $1 million advance, you know, and her books are everywhere. You can walk into a Kroger or a Target and find her novel, you know, and you're winning big prizes. And you can walk into Waterstones and find, you know.
Sometimes.
No, yeah, and find Nadifa's book, and walk into a bookstore and see Abubakar's novels, means that you're being invited to read them like you would read any other novel. You know, so that sort of makes a difference. There is still work to be done on book covers by African writers, because very often, you know, it's the same stock images.
Yeah, the tree and the setting sun.
Or a face, you know. And I remember there's one particular face that's like the cover of at least 3 novels. I mean, Atafona's novel, Helen Habila's novel, and then I think Helen's novel and Uwe Mapan's novel have the same also sort of stock cover. So we're sort of, there, the marketing department in all these big houses, you know, have to start thinking outside the box and giving us like really sexy covers. But I'm happy with my vintage cover. That was really nice.
Thank
That
you.
was really beautiful. Please get that.
She's been waiting.
Hello? Abubakar did have something to say.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Abubakar.
I just wanted to say that it starts with a consciousness, that you are conscious that this is the bracket you've been placed in, and you are conscious that you don't want to be in that bracket. And I think we're at that stage where we feel like we don't want to be in this bracket, and people write their stories being true to themselves. People have said, well, this story is not written for the Western gaze, and that was exactly what I wanted it to be. And I think a lot of writers are writing that way as well now.
And And I think it also helps that we have big commercial houses also popping up in Africa. You know, South Africa doesn't need the West. South African writers publish in South Africa, Nigeria for Rafina, Parasia, Cassava Republic, you know, Lola has one as well. So it's sort of changing the sort of narrative as well, yeah, and it's making a huge difference.
Good afternoon. This is a writing question open to whomever would like to answer it. My question is, what makes characters into people, really? Is it their history, their personality, or their quirks, or their pain, or their voices? At what time, as a writer, do you feel like you're in them, in their heads, feeling their feelings, and they become real? Thank you.
When does a character become real to you? I can try and answer. It's a difficult question, and I think it's different. The main character in my first novel is my dad, a real person. So he's real, he's right there, and but the character, the person that appears in the book, of course, is not an unfiltered version of my dad. It's dependent on the stories that he told me. It's dependent on how I understood those stories, what I wanted to say with the book, and it moved from being actually in the original, it was just meant to be a biography, a pure biography. But I ended up stepping myself into the narrative more and more and wondering about this thing and about that thing and about that conversation. So slowly it became a fiction. And within the novel, there are people who are real from my dad's life. There are people that are real but from different contexts. And then there are purely fictional characters as well. With my second novel, I definitely felt as if I just pulled a curtain away and Kausa, the older woman, was always there, ready, waiting. And she took on a kind of substantiveness in my mind that I didn't expect.
So we can, question over here. We'll take one from the back then, sorry.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for really one of the best panels I've attended.
Closer.
I'm just curious, you know, because two of you are located, situated in the West, what sort of line do you have to navigate writing from a point of immigration, African immigration, into countries where there are established black communities because of the slave tradition, and how do outsiders sort of put expectations on you, and what line do you have to navigate in sort of representing those different experiences or differentiating yourselves from those experiences?
So I think it was about the two of you who live outside.
Outside as well?
No. He's denying living outside. Anyway, so either Nadifa or Chika, like the idea of living in these other places where you have to navigate this outside view, or populations that are part of are descendants of the slave trade.
I can try it. Well, I was born in Somalia, but raised from the age of 4 in London. My dad was there in 1947 already, so he saw a huge amount of change in the way that non-white people were viewed. And to be honest, when he arrived, non-white started at Italian and Cypriot. So there's been a revolution, a slow revolution, in how people like me have been able to make a home in the UK. It was a very hostile place for my father, but he got enough out of it to continue, and he lived there for his whole life. I think that the UK, because of its colonial, imperial history, has a complicated relationship with outsiders. I think it's not like Sweden, where they've had a very homogenous population for a long time, and this very recent influx of people from the rest of the world is something strange and something they have to work around. Gandhi was in the UK. You know, people were moving constantly between Jamaica and the UK. It's just got this complicated history. But do I think it's an easy place necessarily to be? No. And I think at the moment, right now, with Brexit and with all of the stuff that's going on around the world, this kind of wave of hostility, which goes up and down, is now at a high point again.
I completely agree with Nadifa. So I lived in Belgium for 15 years, and even though the States has its own, States is very problematic for someone like me,
And particularly for people from Muslim backgrounds as well.
Yeah, yeah. But Europe was worse, relatively worse, for various reasons. One, for the fact that Belgium has sort of never confronted its colonial history, so that's very problematic. And it's sort of stuck in this, there's a sense of the world of Belgium being very insular, and there's a sense of history happening outside of it. Like whatever has happened doesn't concern us, and in when was this, in 1999, I think, so 20th century, right? With the advent of everything, and you think people should be more knowledgeable, I worked into an employment center. At that point, I had 2 degrees. I was working on my PhD. I walked into an employment center to ask for a job. And I just wanted to know what to do, like, what forms do I need to fill, etc., etc. And I walk in, and the woman looks at me, and the first thing she says, even before I've said hello, is, yeah, we need cleaners. You can start today, And the US, with all its, problems that I'm certainly very much aware of, that would not have happened, because they sort of moved beyond. They sort of moved beyond that kind of stereotyping, So, but the world is a very difficult place to be black at the moment, or to be Muslim.
It always has been. It always has been.
Yeah,
it's never been easy.
But even more so now with the rise of, right wing, and it's everywhere. It's all over Europe. Yeah.
Maybe just one last question.
It will have to be very quick.
Very quickly.
Okay, this question is for Abubakar. To what extent is literature emphasized in your country's education system or in your education background? And how did that influence you to become a writer?
Yeah, I mean, literature is one of those fun subjects that people love to register for. I didn't study it in school. I grew into it, and I used to think poetry was dreadful because of the way it was taught in school, so I kind of didn't want to do that. We had this system where if your grades are a bit above average, you are kind of considered, okay, this guy is good enough for the science classes. So you are corralled into a science direction, and you are supposed to be a medical doctor or an engineer or something like that. And that was the direction I was corralled in. And before I got into the university, I kind of realized, no, I want to write. I didn't want to be a doctor cutting up people and stitching them back together. So it was a conscious decision not to pursue that any further.
Well, thank you. I think we're out of time, but thank you so much for your attention. And yeah.
Thank you.
Let's give a big thanks to Abubakar Adam Ibrahim, Chika Unigwe, Nadifa Mohamed, and Abeer Hoque.